Hi, welcome to Cloud Native and Open Source Virtual Summit China 2020. These are your project updates. So before we actually do project updates, let's actually introduce ourselves so we're not just, fly on the wall. My name is Constance Caramanolis, and I'm a principal software engineer at Splunk. I have the pleasure of working on the governing board for Open Telemetry. It is a sandbox project. You'll be hearing more about it with due time. And I'm a contributor to the collector, which is a part of that project. Before that, I was an Envoy maintainer at Lyft. And now I want to introduce my co-chair, Stephen Augustus.
Hey everyone, I am Stephen Augustus. I am a senior member of technical staff at VMware. I focus on open source technologies, primarily Kubernetes, as well as working on Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. I'm one of the Kubernetes SIG release chairs and release managers. So we're the team that's responsible for actually releasing Kubernetes. Also working in the larger CNCF as one of the SIG contributor strategy chairs. So that's defining methodology and process for to allow all of the CNCF projects to work better, both internally and together. And finally, I'm newly a maintainer of Dex, which is now a CNCF sandbox project. If you want to follow me on Twitter and have a conversation, there's my handle below. So we are going to give you a few project updates, and I'm going to kick it back over to Constance.
Awesome. So actually, before we start a Vitesse project update, one thing I want to do is thank everyone who is watching from home. Hopefully you have your popcorn. I want to thank all of you for your amazing submissions. One thing that really stood out to both Stephen and I was the quality, but also just the scale at which all of you operate your CNCF projects. It is jaw-dropping. So please keep those submissions coming in the next set of summits and conferences, because we want to keep on learning more from all of your experiences. But now let's actually get to the project updates. Vitesse project update. So one thing I want to talk about is graduation. As most of you know, it graduated in November 2019. And so what I want to highlight today is that in January of this year, they shared a blog post about the process of graduating and also just what they've learned from it. And so it really focused on the process, right, in terms of from starting incubation to graduation. And as some of you may or may not know, is that graduation does measure onto several things. One is quality, contributions, adoption. And so one of the ways those things are measured is through the statistics. And so one example of that is the number of stars, right? So one of those easy things you can see at GitHub. And what is really amazing is that over the short period of time from November till now is that the amount of attention this project has gotten has skyrocketed. Back in November of this past year, there were roughly 9,000 stars. And now there are over almost 10,500, right? That is an amazing amount of attention over the past few years, past several months. Same thing goes with commits. At the time of the blog post, there were roughly 17,000 commits. And now there are almost 20,500, right? The amount of work that went into this project is incredible. And so thank you all the contributors to this project. I highly suggest that all of you read this retrospective. Here's the blog post below. It gives definitely insight in terms of the process to reaching graduation and where also the project wants to go. Let's actually talk a little bit more about the details. What has happened this year? There have been two major releases. The first one is version 5. And so it focused on code quality and health. Why I want to highlight this is that these are actually really important towards adoption, right? Installation process. If it's hard to install or include your project or technology, adoption is going to be really low. And so seeing these contributions to increase adoption and ease that process is so valuable. Not only that too, but health of the code base, right? This includes refactoring and deprecating features. These are all important process of the coding lifecycle. Yes, I know it could be a little dorky. And so I want to also commend the people who've done this, because sometimes we forget to thank them for putting all that red PRs. Let's talk about version 6, one of the latest ones. Especially had some cooler features. One is expanding the support for SQL. This came in two ways. One is expanding the support that it had for MySQL statements, understanding wider variety, and also actually improving the end-to-end test and to better reflect what applications and frameworks would do as queries. Another one is a general availability of view replication-based workflows. just as a little tidbit, vReplication is meant to provide use cases such as real-time rollups, resharding, all really important things in terms of database, and this is really cool. And the last thing I want to highlight is the end-to-end test suite in Golang. And why this is actually really important is that one thing that happens at graduation is looking at quality. Quality is hard to measure in terms of contributions while it's up there, but reducing the barrier to provide better testing for a project is something we should all celebrate. And so one thing I want to do is thank everyone who's contributed to this project and to all CNCF projects. And if you're moving to Kubernetes, don't leave your data behind, which is, by the way, a great tagline. Now I'm going to hand it off to Stephen.
Hey, welcome back. So talking about project sustainability, Kubernetes is one of the largest open source projects. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, open source project on Golang today. And it's one of the veterans of the cloud native space. So I think that it's always fun to talk about the new features that are coming out, but I think that it's even more important to talk about some of the things that you might see in a graduation retrospective, right? The things that we care about, code health, lots of the things that Constance was talking about. So by way of that, for process and project level things, we've been working on the Kubernetes Steering Committee is kicking off annual reviews for SIGs and working groups. So the special interest groups and the working groups, which are two of the governance structures in Kubernetes. We're doing some project cleanup. So the GitHub administration team is working on making sure that projects that no longer need to exist in our ecosystem are no longer have maintainers or certain levels of interest around are archived, and any of those assets are transferred into projects that may be more active. So taking our time, we're virtual. Constance and I really wish that we could be meeting and greeting and chatting with you all, but we're virtually distant right now, and that kind of reflected within the Kubernetes project overall. While we have the Kubernetes 1.19.0 release coming out soon, towards the end of August, we did decide to extend the release cycle by about a month and some change. And that was to give an opportunity for the contributors, the consumers, really everyone that's involved in the Kubernetes ecosystem time to digest the global situation, time to tend to their families. So that is something new. That's something that actually will impact the release cycle for 120. We'll see a shorter release for 120. But with the release of 119, we're also extending support for newer Kubernetes releases. So we've been talking, for several cycles. The LTS working group has been talking about extending, discussing what LTS might even look like in Kubernetes, but also what would be some near-term steps that we could take. So one of them is expanding the support cycle for Kubernetes to at least a year, right? So about 12 to 14 months, we're going to see in new releases starting from 119. And then finally, on the project level, we've been talking about, we've established recently a working group for naming, right? There are often a lot of questions around how we should and shouldn't name things, how to be respectful to a variety of demographics, and make sure that our code and our documentation reflects some of that stuff. So this has been in discussion for a little bit, and there have been multiple issues, and we're finally moving forward with establishing guidelines across the project for how to do that, and hoping to do that on a wider CNCF level as well with other projects. So. Now, next up, we're going to talk a little bit about security and release supply chain. Again, it's great to talk about shiny features, but I think it's even more fun to talk about how we how we remain consistent and sustainable as a project over time. So a few things coming out of security and release. We've got the bug bounty program recently spun up, and by recently I think it's been a little bit. It's been around for a little bit. So if you have been interested or have seen bugs that you'd like to discuss as they relate to security, there is a program for that now, sponsored. I think it's available on HackerOne. Around CVs, there has been quite a bit of CV work across the past year or so. Multiple CVs that we have become faster and faster at iterating over and mitigating. So kudos to everyone on the product security committee. Kudos to everyone who is kudos to everyone on the release management teams responsible for getting those releases out, and kudos to everyone who is reporting and reporting responsibly to our various reporting channels. So around releases, around minimizing attack surface, we have lots of chatter around the distroless containers. So distroless containers provide a minimal interface to do the things that you need to do to run in containers. So say you only need to run a binary. This is a smaller footprint if you think of something like building a container from scratch. It's similar to that with a little bit more, a few more bells and whistles. So we've worked on moving our base images over to distroless containers, or a slight modification on top of distroless containers, and we'll see that work come forth in the 119 release cycle. We've sped up, and this is kind of correlated with the CV work. We've sped up our ability to update dependencies across the project, primarily in the core Kubernetes repository, but overall across the project as well. And related to those dependencies are also making sure that we're updating the base images that we build, the API server, the controller manager, scheduler, the kube proxy, all of those things, making sure that we're updating those base images more frequently. For the ones that are not on distro lists yet, we want to make sure that we provide a secure and safe experience for everyone consuming Kubernetes. So related to this, it has been the Kubernetes Infrastructure Working Group. This was an effort that was spun up after the Google donated about 9 million in credits for GCP to the Kubernetes project as a means of providing a base for us to move from Google-based infrastructure and over to community-owned infrastructure. So across the last year and change, there has been quite a bit of improvement with community ownership of infrastructure. We're seeing more of our testing move over to community infrastructure. We're seeing more of our imaging process. So we have an image promotion process that is all community-based right now, and we have recently moved the backing endpoints for kates.gcr.io, which is where all of the images are hosted, over to community infrastructure. And finally, for security, we see, well, not finally, there are several other security updates, but seccomp support has hit GA. So we've seen lots of improvements around seccomp support overall on the host level, and lots of contributors jumping in there to improve the overall testing suites there. So finally, some updates from architecture and cluster lifecycle. So architecture, if you noticed in 116, we deprecated several APIs. This is work that has been in process across multiple SIGs, across multiple cycles. The way Kubernetes deprecates features or enhancements, it takes multiple cycles to do that. So we are doing more work around being clear about how and when we're deprecating APIs. We're writing blog posts, we're getting out to the community and really chatting about some of that stuff, and as well as providing resources we should see in the next few cycles for determining if and when an endpoint is going to be deprecated. There has been lots of discussion around multi-architecture and operating system support. we have seen discussions from the IllumOS crew, the ARM64 folks, and we're trying to make sure that we have a consistent experience for people who are interested in adding architecture or OS support to Kubernetes. Enhancements, topic that is near and dear to my heart, how we introduce change to the Kubernetes ecosystem. We've been making improvements around the labeling, automation, the review and approval of Kubernetes enhancement proposals, or KEPs. And finally, the production readiness reviews. Production readiness reviews have become part of the KEP process. What production readiness reviews are basically, we have a bunch of ops types folks within this project that have seen the way things operate at scale and the way things fail at scale. And we want to make sure that we consider all of the various aspects of this when developing an enhancement, right? What does this enhancement look like when we scale this to 5,000 nodes, right? If that's a question that we can't answer, then we need to step back and talk about it, because a lot of you are operating at that scale. And for cluster lifecycle, we have been discussing for a few cycles now Kube ADM moving out of the core Kubernetes repo. Overall, there are several pieces of functionality, the cloud providers, Kube CTL, or Kube Cuddle, Kube Control, depending on what you prefer, that have existed in the core Kubernetes repo, and for maintenance overall, it makes more sense for them to maybe live separately. Speed of iteration and development, and encouraging more contributions from newer contributors by separating this out into distinct code bases. So expect some forward progress on that in the next few cycles. Then finally, I think that Cluster API has been a really interesting thing that's popped up for the across multiple KubeCons. Cluster API is declarative cluster management using Kubernetes. So it's a very it's a very meta way of deploying your Kubernetes clusters. If you could write manifests, Kubernetes manifests, to describe the resources that belong to Kubernetes cluster, like how would you do that? And Cluster API is the answer. So thank you all for taking the time to sit down with us and chat a little bit about projects. We hope that you have an awesome conference, and we hope that you're staying safe with your respective loved ones, and taking the breaks that you need to in this interesting time.
Thank you, everyone.